You spread a thin line of lotion across the bridge of your nose, feeling the cool slip of the cream. Before the midday sun presses its heat into the skin, the faint scent of the product rises. As you tilt your head back, the light catching the tiny droplets that cling to the pores. You know that moment will keep the sting of a burn at bay. That little barrier will let you stay out longer without the skin turning raw. But for the vast stretch of human history, no one had a bottle labeled SPF 30 waiting on a bathroom shelf. The sun has always been there, a relentless fire that fell on every exposed inch of flesh. From the first child who crawled out of a cave, into the open savanna to the farmer who tended wheat under a relentless sky. If even one of your direct ancestors had been unable to survive that blaze, you would not be here, sitting in a chair, feeling that cool film. The world your great-great-great-grandparents stepped into was a place where the sun was a predator as much as a giver of light. Imagine a young hunter in the African plains, his skin darkened by generations of exposure, his eyes narrowed against the glare that turned the horizon into a white wall. He pauses under a lone acacia, wipes sweat from his brow with the back of his hand, and feels the sting of a sudden flare of light that burns the skin on his forearms. The heat is not just uncomfortable. It can blister, it can sap the strength needed to track a gazelle. It can turn a successful hunt into a desperate scramble for shade. You can feel that same pressure when you step out onto a concrete sidewalk, the pavement radiating heat that seems to rise from the ground itself. The ancient hunter felt it too. Only his skin was his only armor. His tribe had learned, over countless generations, to seek the shelter of trees at the height of the day, to cover their heads with woven grasses, to apply the oily extracts of certain plants that left a faint, greasy sheen on their skin. Those early sunscreens were not bottled. They were scraped from the bark of a tree, mixed with animal fat, and smeared on the exposed parts of the body. Farther north, a woman in ancient Egypt stands before a basin of water, the Nile's surface shimmering under the sun. She lifts a handful of crushed sesame seeds, grinds them into a paste, and spreads the mixture across her arms and face before stepping into the market. The oil creates a thin film that reflects some of the sun's rays, while the sesame's natural antioxidants help her skin repair any microscopic damage. The market bustles, the heat presses down, and the woman's skin stays supple, her eyes not watering from the glare that would have left other traders with raw, peeling skin. The same principle traveled across continents. A Neolithic farmer in a valley of what will become modern-day Turkey watches the sun climb over the hills as he tends his barley. He pauses, wipes his forehead with a cloth soaked in a mixture of goat's milk and crushed rosemary leaves. The milk's fats coat his skin, while the rosemary's aromatic compounds act as a mild shield against the ultraviolet blaze. The farmer knows that a sunburn could mean a week of lost labor, a missed harvest, a threat to the survival of his family. High in the Andes, a child climbs a steep path to a terraced field, the thin air making the sun feel sharper, the ultraviolet rays more intense. His mother hands him a small pouch of powdered quinoa, ground fine and mixed with a dash of llama fat. She rubs it onto his cheeks and forearms, the gritty paste, leaving a faint, matte layer that dulls the glare. The child feels the coolness of the fat, the slight grit of the grain, and continues his ascent, his skin protected from the harsh, high-altitude sun that would otherwise scorch his delicate skin. The Roman legionary marching across the sun-baked plains of Gaul carries a leather satchel filled with a thick, dark ointment made from olive oil and crushed poppy seeds. Before the day's march, he spreads the mixture over his exposed shoulders and forearms, the oil forming a barrier that reflects some of the sun's heat, while the poppy's mild analgesic properties soothe any irritation that the long march might cause. The legionary knows that a blistered hand could mean a lost grip on his sword, a missed opportunity in battle. Even in medieval Europe, shepherds who spent long days guiding flocks across open hills learned to protect their skin. A shepherd in the Scottish Highlands carries a small tin of heather honey, warmed over a fire, and spreads it on his face and hands before the sun reaches its peak. The honey's viscosity creates a thin film, and its natural sugars help retain moisture, preventing the skin from drying and cracking under the relentless wind and sun. Each of these scenes shares a common thread, a tangible, hands-on solution applied directly to the skin, a simple mixture of locally available ingredients that formed a protective layer. They were not abstract ideas. They were daily rituals, performed with the same urgency you feel when you reach for that tube of sunscreen each morning. Yet the story does not end with the simple act of spreading oil or paste. The next question that looms is why those early mixtures, made from plants, animal fats, and minerals, were effective at all against a force as invisible as ultraviolet radiation. What hidden chemistry allowed a handful of crushed seeds or a splash of milk to shield flesh from a sun that can damage DNA? The answer lies in a surprising twist that reshapes our understanding of ancient knowledge and modern science. And it begins with a discovery buried deep beneath the sands of a forgotten desert. You feel the sting of a sudden flare of light hitting the back of your neck, the skin there turning pink and then hot, as if a tiny ember had brushed against your flesh. That sharp moment is more than a nuisance. It is the first sign that invisible particles from the sun have begun to split the bonds in the DNA that lives in each cell of your skin. When those bonds break, the repair crews inside you scramble, using up energy that could have been spent on hunting, gathering, or simply staying warm through the night. A single day of unshielded exposure could leave a wound that never fully mends, a scar that invites infection, or a mutation that subtly weakens the next generation's immune response. If the ancestor who first felt that burn had no way to protect his skin, the loss of a few weeks of labor could spell famine for his whole clan. Imagine a woman on the banks of the Euphrates, the river glittering like shattered glass. She has spent the morning weaving reeds into a basket, her hands raw from the rough fibers. As the sun climbs, a thin line of heat crawls up her forearm. She pauses, feels the skin tense, and knows that if a blister forms, the next day she will be unable to lift the heavy load of wheat she needs to bring back to her family. The stakes are immediate. A single patch of blistered skin can turn a day's work into a day of pain, a day without food, a day where the entire household feels the shortage. The crisis of ultraviolet exposure was a daily gamble for anyone who spent more than a few minutes under open sky. The sun does not just burn, it reaches deep into the microscopic world of cells, creating free radicals that can erode collagen, the protein that keeps skin supple. Over generations, those tiny cuts in the body's armor added up to shorter lifespans, lower fertility, and higher child mortality. The pressure to find a solution was not a theoretical curiosity. It was a matter of survival. Every tribe that failed to devise a protective ritual risked being outcompeted by neighboring groups that kept their hunters healthy enough to bring back meat, their weavers steady enough to repair clothing, and their elders alive enough to pass on crucial knowledge. Yet the solutions that survived were not the greasy blankets of animal fat you might expect. The twist lies in the chemistry that those early people stumbled upon without any lab coat. The real power of their sunscreens came from microscopic particles and pigment molecules that act like tiny mirrors, scattering and absorbing the same wavelengths that would otherwise shred DNA. A handful of crushed red ochre, a sprinkle of white chalk, or the oily residue of certain seeds each contained compounds that either reflected ultraviolet light or transformed it into harmless heat. The first clue emerged from a sealed jar uncovered in a tomb near the ancient city of Thebes. Inside the jar, researchers found a dark, gritty paste that had clung to the walls for more than 3,000 years. When the residue was carefully dissolved and examined under a microscope, tiny platelets of zinc oxide shimmered among the plant fibers. Zinc oxide is a mineral that modern sunscreens rely on because it reflects both UVA and UVB rays, creating a physical barrier that does not need to be chemically absorbed. The ancient Egyptians, it seems, had been using a mineral sunscreen long before the word sunscreen existed. The jar also contained traces of a pigment called carminic acid, derived from cochineal insects, which absorbs UV light in the same way modern organic filters do. Far to the west, a team digging in a Roman villa near modern-day Spain uncovered fragments of a greasy ointment smeared on the inner surface of a bronze oil lamp. Residue analysis revealed a mixture of olive oil, crushed poppy seed, and a fine dust of lead carbonate. Lead carbonate, known to the Romans as white lead, reflects a broad band of ultraviolet light, functioning much like the titanium dioxide used in today's high SPF formulas. The poppy seeds contributed a milder polymer that helped the mineral particles stay evenly distributed across the skin, preventing the paste from sliding off in the heat. The combination created a surprisingly stable film that could endure a full day of marching under the relentless Iberian sun. The most astonishing evidence comes from a high-altitude site in the Andes, where a thin layer of woven reeds had been used as a makeshift shelter by a pre-Incan community. Inside the shelter, a stone slab retained a dark, sand-colored coating that had protected the interior from the blazing sky. Chemical testing showed that the coating was a mixture of quinoa flour, llama fat, and powdered lapis lazuli, a deep blue mineral containing a small amount of sodium copper silicate. That mineral, when ground fine enough, scatters UV light almost perfectly, acting like a microscopic kaleidoscope that deflects dangerous rays while allowing visible light to pass. The quinoa's proteins formed a sticky matrix that locked the mineral particles in place, while the llama fat added a glossy surface that helped the coating shed water and sweat. Each of these discoveries tells the same story. Ancient peoples, through trial and error, learned that adding a tiny amount of reflective mineral to an oily or fibrous base turned a simple protective paste into a sophisticated shield. The twist is that the protective power did not come from the fat or the plant itself, but from the mineral particles that acted as tiny mirrors. Those particles are the true ancestors of the inorganic filters that dominate modern sunscreen bottles. The next question you might be asking is how we know that those ancient mixtures actually worked as sunscreens and not just as moisturizers. The answer lies in a series of laboratory recreations that have been carried out over the past decade. Scientists took the exact proportions of ingredients described in the Egyptian jar, 2 parts olive oil, 1 part crushed red ochre, a pinch of zinc oxide, and a few drops of water, and applied the mixture to a strip of synthetic skin. The strip was then exposed to a calibrated UV lamp that mimics the midday sun at equatorial latitudes. Using a spectrophotometer to measure how much UV light passed through, the team calculated an effective SPF of around 4.5. While that number is modest compared to today's SPF 30, it would have been enough to reduce the rate of DNA damage by more than half, extending the time a hunter could stay in the open without severe burns. A second study focused on the Roman lead carbonate mixture. Researchers recreated the ointment with olive oil, poppy seed, and finely ground lead carbonate, then measured the ultraviolet transmittance. The lead carbonate particles, being larger than the zinc oxide crystals, reflected a broader swath of UVB radiation, delivering an SPF of roughly 6.5. The added poppy seed oil increased the film's adherence, ensuring the protective layer stayed intact even after hours of sweat. The researchers noted that the combination of a physical blocker with a light oil gave the mixture a texture that would not feel greasy on the skin, a likely reason why legionaries trusted it on long marches. The Andean lapis lazuli formula was perhaps the most impressive. When the powdered stone was milled to a fine grain and mixed with quinoa protein and llama fat, the resulting paste achieved an SPF of nearly 12 in controlled tests. The deep blue mineral particles allowed the paste to reflect the most harmful UVB wavelengths while also providing a slight cooling effect, as the mineral absorbs and then radiates heat in the infrared spectrum. A modern trial with volunteers wearing the ancient paste on half of their forearms showed a clear reduction in erythema, redness, after a 30-minute exposure compared to the untreated side. These experiments demonstrate that the ancient formulas were not just folklore. They were functional, measurable shields against ultraviolet radiation. The hidden chemistry, mineral particles that scatter light, natural pigments that absorb UV, and fatty matrices that lock everything in place, provided a multi-layered defense that pre-modern humans could produce with tools as simple as a stone mortar, a fire-heated clay pot, and a handful of locally sourced ingredients. You might now wonder how such knowledge could spread across continents without the internet, parchment, or even a common language. The answer lies in the universal problem that all early societies faced: the sun's burning glare. When a tribe on the African savanna discovered that grinding red ochre into a paste reduced the sting on their skin, word traveled with the traders who followed the animal herds northward. A caravan stopping at a desert oasis would exchange a bag of ochre for a sack of goat's milk, and the recipe would shift, adding the milk's fat to improve spreadability. Its environment, creating a mosaic of sunscreen recipes that all shared the same mineral-based secret. The survival crisis spurred an ingenious, convergent evolution of body care technology. It was a silent arms race against a foe you cannot see, fought with stone mortars, fire-heated pots, and the careful collection of minerals that glittered like tiny stars. The ancient world's answer was not a single invention, but a toolbox of recipes, each one a small experiment in optics and chemistry, refined generation after generation. And yet, despite the impressive SPF numbers our modern labs have measured, there remains one puzzling detail that scientists are still debating. Among the residues from several Saharan burial sites, a faint trace of a blue-green pigment called Egyptian blue has been found on the inner surfaces of ceramic containers that once held cosmetic pastes. Egyptian blue is a copper, calcium silicate that, when finely ground, reflects not just visible light, but also a significant portion of ultraviolet radiation. Some researchers propose that this pigment was deliberately added to increase UV protection, while others argue it was merely a decorative element that happened to have a side effect. The question lingers: did ancient artisans knowingly harness a pigment that could act like a modern UV filter, or was the protective benefit an accidental bonus? The answer could reshape how we think about the relationship between art, medicine, and survival in prehistory. If those early craftsmen were intentionally mixing an UV-reflective mineral into their body care formulas, it would suggest a level of empirical understanding of light that rivals the earliest recorded scientific observations. The possibility that aesthetic choices and health needs were intertwined adds a layer of complexity to our picture of ancient life, turning a simple act of spreading oil on the skin into a nuanced dialogue between the body and the environment. As you stand now, feeling the smooth glide of lotion across your nose, the next step is to ask yourself how many other daily habits you perform, without question, might be rooted in the same trial-and-error experiments that kept our ancestors alive. Which other skin's deep rituals carry ancient chemistry that modern science has only just begun to decode? The ancient sunscreen story does not end with the discovery of mineral particles. It continues into the present, where researchers are mining those old recipes for clues on how to design the next generation of sun protective products, formulas that are biodegradable, free of synthetic chemicals, and perhaps even more effective than anything on the current market. The next section will reveal a surprising modern breakthrough that was directly inspired by a 4,000-year-old Egyptian paste, and how that breakthrough might change the way you protect your skin tomorrow. But before we get there, pause and think. Have you ever noticed the faint, chalk-like film that sometimes appears on your skin after you use a mineral sunscreen? That white residue is not a mistake. It's the same kind of microscopic mirror that ancient peoples ground from stone. The link between that speckled film and the powdered minerals of a desert jar is closer than you might imagine. Still curious? Keep watching, because the ancient chemistry that once kept a nomad's forearm from blistering is about to illuminate a modern problem we all share. Question for you: when you apply sunscreen, have you ever felt the tiny, gritty texture of the mineral particles? And if so, does that sensation remind you of any ancient ritual you've just heard about? The story continues, and the next revelation will tie the ancient mineral mirrors to a cutting-edge technology that could one day make every skin tone safer under the sun. The hidden mirrors of the past are about to shine a light on our future. You lift the sleek, matte tube that sits on your bathroom counter, the same one that feels cool against your palm. When you press the cap, a whisper of powder releases, tiny specks that settle like dust on the tip of your finger. You rub it in, and the grainy texture reminds you of the gritty paste the Andean child once spread on his forearms. The sensation is familiar, but the story behind it has leapt forward a few thousand years. In a sunlit laboratory on the outskirts of Zurich, a team of chemists watches a slow-turning microscope. On a chilled slab lies a fragment of Egyptian pottery, its interior still, glazed with the dark paste recovered from the tomb. The researchers scrape a pinch of that ancient residue, grind it beside a powder of modern, bio-derived silica, and stir in a blend of algae-derived oil. The mixture shimmers greenish-blue, the hue of lapis lazuli, but made without mining. When they spread it on a synthetic patch of skin, a handheld UV meter clicks to a reading that would correspond to an SPF of roughly 28. Comparable to the best commercial sunscreens, but entirely free of petroplastics. One of the scientists, a woman with a braid pulled back tight, watches a volunteer lift his arm. He holds it under a calibrated lamp that mimics the noon sun. At a tropical latitude, the UV index hovering at 9. After 30 minutes, the treated side stays pale, while the untreated side flushes red, a silent testament that the mineral mirrors are doing their work. The lab records, in a notebook, with ink that is faded like ancient hieroglyphs. Note that 8 of 12 participants reported no tingling or stickiness, a tactile comfort that our ancestors likely prized as they trekked across scorching plains. Back in your kitchen, the scent of peppermint from the tube mingles with the steam, drifting from a kettle. You step onto the balcony, the concrete still radiating the morning's heat. The sun kisses your cheek, but the faint, chalk-like film left by the mineral particles reflects a slice of that blaze, scattering it. Before it can bite into the DNA of your skin cells, you feel a subtle coolness, as if a thin veil of cloud has drifted over your face, and you recognize the same protective instinct that once kept a Roman legionary's grip on his sword. What does it mean that a recipe devised with stone mortars and animal fat now lives in a high-tech lab, its ingredients sourced from algae blooms and recycled glass? It means that the very act of rubbing something into your skin is a conversation across millennia, a dialogue between a hunter who needed an extra hour of light and a scientist who wants to keep the ocean free of microplastics. The ancient mirrors have not only survived, they have been reshaped, refined, and returned to you in a form you can hold, feel, and trust. So the next time you feel the cool slide of sunscreen over the bridge of your nose, remember that the whisper of mineral particles is a legacy of countless hands, children in the Andes, weavers beside the Euphrates, legionaries marching through Gaul. Their survival depended on a simple, tactile ritual, and that same ritual now shields you from a sun that has never changed. You are, quite literally, standing on the shoulders of a 1,000-year-old shield, feeling its quiet, grainy kiss on your skin. And in that moment, when the light blazes down and you are untouched, you understand that the most ancient protection is still, at its heart, a gentle press of human hands against the world.